Good morning. Thank you so much. And good morning, that is in the Americas. Good afternoon in France. My name is David Ackerly, and I'm the Dean of the Rausser College of Natural Resources at the University of California, Berkeley. It is a pleasure to serve as moderator and kick off the first session of this Transatlantic Symposium. I expect that many of you have not ventured far from home in the last year, and the normal ebb and flow of academic conferences and interactions among colleagues has been greatly curtailed. On the other hand, this event highlights how we have been brought closer together, first by the shared experience of a global pandemic, and secondly, by the necessary and global embrace of remote technologies such as Zoom and this meeting. To kick off discussions for the next several days, it seems only appropriate to start by reflecting on how the pandemic may impact the future of higher education, including our collective efforts to provide leadership in research, in teaching, and also as institutions towards global sustainability. We have a wonderful panel of speakers representing a diverse array of institutions and geographies. Through events such as this, we can learn from each other as we construct a community of practice in the post-pandemic world. By sharing perspectives from the US and France, we have the opportunity to compare and contrast the approaches and responses to the pandemic in our two countries, and contribute to a global discussion about what is shared and what may be distinct in different university systems and cultures. Some universities are likely working as hard as they can to get back to business as usual. I would say that is the dominant theme at UC Berkeley. Others may be well into a process of reinvention and looking at how they will emerge from the pandemic permanently transformed. These transformations could impact any and all aspects of university life: the nature of instruction, the student experience, the way we conduct and collaborate in research, the problems we work on, and perhaps of greatest interest to this audience, how we lead and contribute on sustainability. As we have all taught from home and eliminated both our commutes and long distance travel, our personal carbon footprints may be greatly reduced. But we've seen that the global reductions in CO2 emissions last year were quite modest, as life went on and the goods and services we need for our lives were delivered to our homes, even if we didn't go out to get them. I don't think anyone would want to propose global pandemics as the path to sustainability. And indeed, the hard work of achieving net zero carbon emissions still lies ahead. I will introduce each of our panelists in turn, and they will provide brief remarks that describe the perspective that they bring, followed by our question and answer session. For those in the audience, you may submit questions through the webinar chat function, the Q&A function, sorry, and I will pose questions to the panel after the introductory remarks. We probably won't be able to get to all the questions that come in, and I apologize in advance if you don't hear your question come up for the panel. I will also apologize in advance for any poor pronunciation of names or institutions of our French colleagues, as I last took French in the 5th grade, which in the US is when you're about 10 years old. Our first speaker today is Patrick Legalès. Patrick is the founding dean of Sciences Po Urban School and a French National Center for Scientific Research, that's the CNRS, research professor of sociology and politics. He is also a corresponding fellow of the British Academy, a member of the Academia Europaea, and a co-editor of the European Journal of Sociology. Patrick, please start us off to comment on how your school handled the COVID crisis, in particular the ways that the response itself is linked to the curriculum that your students address, and very appropriately for today, how this impacted your existing and your developing international programs.
Thank you, David, and thanks to all the organizers of this great meetings. As you rightly underlined, we need those exchange more than ever, even if we cannot travel. So it's a great pleasure to be on this great panel. My school, the urban school, is about 400 students, to give you the scale, but it's part of Sciences Po. And a lot of what I would say is about the reaction of the old Sciences Po institution and the urban school being part of it. And I want to emphasize that we're not in the process of going back as usual. We are rather in a situation where we try to combine both some of the changes that were started and to accelerate them, but also to implement some small, low-key, incremental changes that might prove also important in the future. The first reaction when we had the crisis was relatively quick. And I want to emphasize something which is always put forward in terms of leadership. What was striking for us, I think, in the case of Sciences Po, what used to be a rather centralized institution, was by contrast, in face of a crisis, we changed our governance and we went for a much more collective organization and governance. And in a way, I want to emphasize that, probably because I'm French, you could see that in our country, the very centralized response to a crisis was not a great success at the beginning. And it's precisely when you can combine capacity to give a direction, governance, together with very strong collective implementation as well, decision and implementation, that you have some capacity to deal with the crisis. And in a way, that's what we've tried to implement at Sciences Po. So it was quite smooth. We went quickly to the Zoom system and the technology change was pretty quick, but we had no choice because we have 50% of foreign students at Sciences Po. So, lots of them, we had to deal with them one way. The big choice that we did for the following semester was not to go full-time online, but to go what we call hybrid. And hybrid had two meanings, two significations, two ways of thinking. Number one was to decide that we would go for about 75% of the classes with physical or on video, and we keep 25% with physical presence, with small groups. So we try to use the resources we have in terms of rooms, with distance, just to keep about a fourth of small group teaching with presence in order to keep the students together as we could. And to do that, hybrid in the second sense, we develop the capacity to teach at the same time students that are present and students that are away. And a large number of our students, of course, were not there before the complete lockdown. So one thing we did in the urban school is that we always organized a number of visits in the Paris big urban region. And we tried, for instance, to develop some small technologies so that for each visit, we get a group of 4 or 5 students walking 2 meters away with some team technology. But each time, 1 or 2 of them were in charge of the absentees with their smartphone, and they were already preparing questions and filming and interacting with them on a permanent basis. So we tried to develop small tricks so that the absentee students could do the visit with us. And then we organized meetings, of course, to aggregate all the issues. So there were a number of small things we did in order to devise those work. And of course, after November, we went all online. The other thing we did was to emphasize that teaching was one thing, but on the research side, like everybody else around this table, I'm sure, we developed some webinar for the research part of the school. But because of that, we decided to be a little bit braver than usual, and we systematically invited colleagues from Asia, East Asia, South America, Africa, that we were not used to invite on such a regular basis. So we took that as an advantage to increase our internationalization and to bring to the students some colleagues, including in some universities we are not always used to work with as more regular, and to be more innovative in the type of people we brought in our conversation, both professionals and academics. The third thing we did was that we would try to keep developing our program. Of course, it was a difficult year for foreign students and for people coming from far away, but we took advantage of that to develop our new program, and we're just very proud to, sorry David, to open a new double degree with UCLA on urban studies, which I believe is the first double degree about urban studies in the US. And we're now working on a new double degree with Valeria, who's just there, in India that we work. The last thing we did was really wanted to emphasize that we tried to organize visits. So as you know, with the crisis, we had waves, first, second, third wave. So between 2 waves, when there was some opening, immediately we organized some visits as much as we could. So the idea was to be flexible, reactive, to welcome students whenever they join us, because some of them came 2 months later, and of course to develop some specific support for those using both new technological devices and ways to organize. I would like to say one thing about the students as well, and I think Smarty was made a point. One interesting thing is about how the students are changing. In our experience, both at the urban school and at Sciences Po, we have about 15 students, 15, that face serious difficulties, either health issues or housing issues, of concentration issues, whatever it could be. So what we're trying to do is to develop specific tutoring for those in crisis. And can I share with you one of the important lessons we learned when we tried to reach out for the students that were facing more difficulties? Of course, we had our administration following them, but that was not enough. So as a dean, I talked to all of them, but some never came. And we realized that, in fact, different kinds of students needed different kinds of way to reach them. So some of them reacted to their professor in their class. So we asked all professors to try to talk and to identify students facing problems. Sometimes they would talk to the admin, and very often it was the students themselves who helped us to identify those who had the more severe problems. And emphasize, we had these 4 ways to identify them, and each of them identified different kind of students. So that was very important to have a collective effort to try to identify the students and not just one device. And then we created special tutoring, mentoring for them, either on Saturday morning or sometimes with students and sometimes with professors. It was really dependent. So this variety of students in difficulty was very strong. Because for us, what was striking is, they behave quite well, the students. They really try hard, most of them, and they understood the difficulty. Even some of them were really in trouble. But what was striking that a lot of them were facing the uncertainty. That was difficult for them, was we don't know what will happen the next 6 months, we don't know. So we try to tell them, okay, you just do like us, you follow the pandemics. There are lots of things that are unknown, but each time we have some improvement of a situation between 2 waves, we will do the maximum physical and on-site and visits. And we know with the professors, things go bad, we stop and we come back to visio. You have to learn agility and to become flexible. They were not very happy at the beginning, but they got used to do that. Some of them developed very strange behaviors, but the vast majority did very well. So to conclude, what we have tried to use the crisis is to teach the student, number one, the importance of collective action. There's not one best way, but they have to develop different kind of device and ways to deal with difficulty. And it's not a top-down situation. We were able to show, at some point we could compare various cities dealing with the pandemics, but also in Sciences Po comparing various organizations and to show them that the strength in case of crisis is to be able to innovate on a number of issues and using the technology of various kinds of teaching or different size of groups according to different kinds of students, mixing presence and visios, and to be really part of the old school and being part of the Sciences Po strategy. And that was this capacity to articulate scale, the major issues, of course, for people working on cities or environment or whatever. And if you were able to develop this thing, and to emphasize the last point is implementation, implementation, implementation. What we saw in the crisis, of course, it also revealed the weak part of the organization. And we could see that some of our organization, some bits, some people were more fragile. And as, I don't know about you, but for us, and at the Sciences Po level and the school, we could identify some weak part of our organizations. And that's one of the major issues nowadays, is to change some of the curriculum, adapt with these different formats, but also to think in a more resilient way about our organizations. That would be the main lessons I could share with you, and not giving up on thinking about developing comparative critical minds of our students and international project that we keep emphasizing.
Thank you so much. I'm fascinated that you led with governance, because this is something we also learned at UC, that some of you may know, we have a long history of the importance of faculty governance, and our academic senate was just brilliant during the pandemic. They just took on so many issues, and I think the fact that the problems were solved through shared governance allowed everyone to come to the table with joint solutions. They were not imposed, and that collaboration was absolutely essential for our universities. Thank you. So thank you very much. We're going to cross the Atlantic, and our next speaker is Marty Matlock. Marty is a board director of GCSE and is executive director of the University of Arkansas Resiliency Center and professor of ecological engineering in the biological and agricultural engineering department. His interdisciplinary research focuses on technologies and processes to increase the resilience of ecosystem services, with a focus on food, water, and community systems. Marty, what can you share with us about how the pandemic accelerated the embrace of remote learning technologies for your institution, but also the impact on student attitudes towards their education and your ability to build community among the students, which we've heard more about from Patrick as well.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for this wonderful, timely conversation. You know, we've been struggling with the role of technology in education for about 15 years extensively around the world, but in the United States in particular. And we've had fairly strong advocates for implementing distance, not in place, not residence education programs. Among them, Michael Crow, who's the president of Arizona State University, also received what was the National Council for Science and Environment, now the Global Council for Science and Environment Lifetime Achievement Award in January of 2020. And I had to go back and look because I thought January 2020 was pandemic. I mean, we have been in this pandemic for only 15 months and it feels like 15 years. And let me tell you, if you're 20 years old, it feels like your entire life. And that's one of our challenges our students have had, is this has framed entire generations of experience and attitudes. And we'll get to that in a minute. So the Academy, you know, we're always reluctant to adopt change. John Dewey said when he was advocating for experiential education in the 1920s, that just because that experiential education is the way we naturally learn, but you got to also have the other ways of learning too. Don't throw everything, don't go all one way. Well, we went all one way. We were thrown into the deep end of the cold water of online learning a little over a year ago. And in the process, we adapted and we developed things that worked and we figured out what didn't work. So one of our real challenges is we've got demographic shifts occurring across the United States and around the world. We have inequitable distribution and access of broadband internet. And if we're going to use this technology as a medium for equitable distribution of resources, it has to be equitably available, and it is not. So we have an inequity that is absolutely profound right now around the world and in the United States. So location, the freedom from location, the tyranny of location on residence programs can be revolutionary for our education program. It can give students the opportunity to participate in your programs, David, in California from anywhere in the world, and my programs from Arkansas from anywhere in the world, and from our colleagues in France, anywhere. We can all start sharing classes. We can all start sharing knowledge. It is, and we've had experiments of this, but we haven't seen it work very effectively because of a number of reasons, administrative cost structure model and accreditation, et cetera. But the fact is we have this opportunity and it's going to unfold. We have to optimize our pedagogical models because they are, as previous speaker indicated, we all kind of went to hybrid, to flip, to online, to all sorts of things this spring, especially after we got through the horrible fall. And that will provide further innovations. I'm very excited about seeing those emerge. Let's get to the student attitudes now. We have seen mental stress, mental anxiety, and depression accelerate across our student bodies. We were already struggling with as much as 30% of our students of 18 to 22-year-olds having difficulty with mental stress, and anxiety, and depression. And we all know that the part of the academic experience is that sort of compression of knowledge and growth in a very short period of time, and knowledge acquisition and growth. And that is by nature a stressful process. It's a transformative process. Transformation doesn't happen easily. But what we struggle with is that you layer over the cultural challenges, social challenges, the isolation, the difficulties of the pandemic, the fundamental loss of hope for their futures that our students are facing. And we can, those of us of a certain age can say, looking back, and even though this is a once in a 100-year event, we still have a historical perspective to say it will get better. Many of these young folks don't have that perspective. And it's important that we remind them it will get better, and it will in fact get good, because we're just losing too many of them. They're dropping out of their own hopes and dreams. That means we have to recreate this sense of shared experience and common purpose, and the Academy has to be part of that. That means we have to change the way we engage with our students and move away from the autocratic authority of knowledge and authority of expertise into a much more mentoring and I dare say soft leadership style with our students. We have to. It's necessary. They deserve it. And finally, just from a pure logistics perspective, I work with our facilities management folks as the director of sustainability on our campus as well. And I can tell you that we froze all of our growth of space. We're rethinking. We were at a crisis mode because our campus was growing so fast prior to 2020 that we were running out of office space. We had arts and sciences departments with 20% deficiency in office space for faculty. Faculty are already working from home and very frustrated by it. Now we've discovered it works, and that we're moving to a much more sort of a hotelier model for office space, where you have shared space for scheduled time periods, instead of that hallowed name on the door of the faculty member in the office. So we're transforming our classrooms. The notion that we would have a 200-seat auditorium for a lecture is ludicrous today. There's nothing about a 200-seat lecture auditorium for academic lectures that makes sense given our technology today. 20-seat lectures, certainly, that's much more intimate, but 200-seat video is demonstrably just as effective. There are other reasons, of course. So I'll wrap up with just simply saying we are excited about what's coming. We are also deeply concerned about the challenges our students are facing.
Marty, thank you. I think we've already heard the common theme here, just the student experience and the stress that was experienced. I'm really glad you brought up the digital divide. We know that's the phrase I'll give to what you were talking about, the access to broadband. Very poignant problem, very painful problem in the United States, certainly very problematic globally. And maybe we'll hear from French colleagues whether this is a similar issue, just about access to internet, because as we go down this path, if we don't have access, then nothing else works if there isn't equity of access across populations. Returning to France, our next speaker is Gérald Majou. Gérald is the Manager of Sustainability and Student Life for the Conférence des Grandes Écoles, France's network of prestigious engineering, business, and architecture schools. Gérald, please share with us how the COVID pandemic impacted your work on behalf of the schools in your network, and perhaps you have a slightly different perspective as you're not seeing it just from the view of one institution, but an entire network of institutions across the country.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. And thanks to organizers who gave me the opportunity to be here with all of you. The Conférence des Grandes Écoles I work for is a partner NGO of the public authorities. It's also a postmaster training label and a think tank based on the network of 227 higher education members. I will not return on the COVID crisis, positive or negative impacts on pedagogy. This has been very well developed by my colleagues, and I share overall the findings and perspectives. As regard of student life, we had collectively to transform significantly our role, ensuring a daily link between our members, the French state, and student organizations, so that public support measures for institutions and students are well adapted to all situations encountered. We fostered financial support for students in precarious situations. We fostered €1 meals in university restaurants. We fostered computer purchases to allow students to take online courses. We fostered peer-to-peer listening service to help students suffering from isolation, and we supported for international scholarship students wishing to join their country. We did to intensify the sharing of experiences between our members via collaborative tools so that best practices in terms of alternatives to usual activities may be appropriate by all. For example, many of them developed buddy systems for all the newcoming students, as well as online associative forum. Nearly all of them transformed festive events into cultural activities. We've also created moments for deans to step back from a day-to-day focus on emergency and reflect on aftermath of COVID, reflect on how to improve resilience of their universities in an uncertain world. This resulted in short-term and mid-term recommendations such as advocate the authorities with the most normal back to university in fall, protect students from any new stigma as they were unjustly accused of creating clusters last year, support recent and coming graduates in difficulty to find a job, prepare the psychological backlash of the lockdown period. The reports of psychologists and student life managers in our universities are worrisome. This crisis and its national erratic management will leave a deep mark in the population, and especially in the teenager and student population, who is at the pivotal age in his life. We recommend to review the human resource policy with regard to the needs identified in this period, such as promotion of educational activities in teachers' careers, increase of telework, support for digitalization, take advantage of this situation to rethink the mobility of staff and students, as we need to reduce our carbon footprint. And last, we strengthen the links with all the stakeholders in the region and with our local communities. To conclude, I said this to this brief stage, I'd say that reimagining the student and staff experiences with regard to the fair value of face-to-face is our great challenge. There is an opportunity to be seized, and it can lead to a new economic model based on the acquisition of skills that cannot be induced remotely and in the virtual life. I'm thinking of many so-called psychosocial skills, such as interculturality or skills related to socio-ecological transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerald. I think we're hearing very strong common themes. I'm also glad you brought up this next phase of student life about transitions to a changing job market, and certainly that and the increased anxiety for a lot of students trying to do that at this moment right now is quite extraordinary. Our next speaker is Eric Leschinski. Eric is the interim provost of the Maricopa County Community College District, where he oversees all departments under the Academic and Student Affairs Division. He has more than 20 years of experience in education, including student success, faculty development, program management, instructional design, and classroom instruction. Eric, you bring a unique perspective here on the impacts of COVID on community colleges. And I will say, I don't know exactly the equivalent of our American community college system, what that would be in France. We may be able to delve into that. And we look forward to hearing your remarks and your experiences.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and it's great to virtually connect with everyone. The American community colleges are a unique aspect of higher education. I'm privileged and honored to offer some insight today about how we, as community colleges and in the state of Arizona where I'm located, have responded to the COVID pandemic. First, to give you a sense of our system, the Maricopa Community Colleges is a 10 college system. So we have 10 community colleges that are part of our system, and we serve over 200,000 students on an annual basis. So we're a very large system with our primary focus on the 2-year degree, with students transferring to universities in the state of Arizona or throughout the United States. And we also spend a lot of our emphasis on workforce development with certificates and individuals and students coming to us to either get additional training to enter the workforce or to when they're in the workforce to re-career or retrain to go into another field. So we're a very large system, and we serve over 200,000 students on an annual basis. The COVID pandemic, though, had a significant impact on who we are and who we're serving. The majority of our students, more than 50% of our students, are first generation students. And what we mean by that, they're the first in their family to attend college. So obviously it's a very important economic development engine for our community, as first to college come to us to advance their career and advance their academic goals. In addition, most of our students are in the workforce right now. So we do not traditionally have the full-time student, if you will. They're part-time students who are working full-time jobs. And so they're trying to balance work and life, and oftentimes many different aspects of taking care of their family, whether it's their own children, whether it's their parents, something of that nature. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we've seen a decline in enrollment across community colleges across the United States of upwards of 15 to 20%. And that's a significant decline when it comes to first time to college individuals that are attending community college to maybe advance to university. So the pandemic had a significant negative impact on community college enrollment. When you look at that enrollment a little deeper, you'll see that that negative impact significantly had an impact, again, on the first generation student and also students of color, students that represent groups that are not necessarily the majority of the student population. So consequently, that has a significant impact on who we are and who we are indeed serving. Last March was a very significant time for all of us, and we transitioned 100% to the virtual environment. We did so in a short amount of time, just as everyone here had to do so. And it caused a lot of great challenges for us. The digital divide was indeed mentioned. Let me paint a picture for what we were seeing in our system in the Maricopa Community Colleges in Arizona. First and foremost, we had a significant number of our students who did not have access to technology. They did not have a laptop. They did not have a functional home computer, if you will, or if they did, it was being shared by multiple generations in the same household. So consequently, their ability to learn was challenged. So what we did across our system is we implemented a laptop checkout program. Our goal was to get laptops in the hands of every student who needed one to the best of our ability. That was our first challenge, was the actual technology. Then the second challenge was access to broadband or access to the internet. And what we found in our system and also again across the nation, some of our students did not have reliable access to the internet. So consequently, many of our community colleges left their parking lots open. And it was common, although not the best learning environment, obviously, but it was very common to see students parked in a parking lot or in the open space as we opened up a little bit more on their laptop, on a phone, gathering the access to the internet, if you will, and indeed trying to learn. Again, not optimal, but that's the challenges that many of our students faced. And then similarly, the challenges the student faced were adjusting to this new learning environment. Many of our students were not used to learning in the online environment or the hybrid environment. And also many of our faculty were not used to teaching in the online environment. So consequently, we had to invest in many things. One was we invested in the training of our faculty to teach in the online environment. We had to invest in the development or the conversion of many of our on-ground classes into the online environment, whether hybrid or fully online. And we had to engage in greater support services for our students as well, so they could be successful in learning in the online environment. We are now coming out of the pandemic to some extent. We expect that our college campuses in the Maricopa system will be open, fully functional come fall of 21, so just a month or so away. And what that will mean is we need to be flexible. We want any student who wants to access learning remotely to have the ability to do so. Any student that wants to access services remotely should be able to do so. But also, we need to be able to support the student who we know needs that in-person support. So we're doing our best to create flexible learning environments where a student can come to one of our colleges. If they choose to be fully in person, we'll have the schedule and support services to meet their needs. However, for various reasons, if they need to be remote and in a hybrid situation, we'll do all we can do to support them as well. So the last piece I'll conclude with is one, the digital divide was very real. Two, the pandemic definitely impacted the community college students, but more importantly, the first generation student was greater proportionate of the impact. And then now the words I will use are flexibility. We're going to do all we can do to create a flexible learning environment so our students are able to access education that meets their needs. So again, I look forward to our continued conversation today, and thanks for inviting me to be part of the panel.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's so interesting because in many ways, I think in the United States, we look to the community colleges as the place that has embraced flexibility the most with students who are working or working parents. And yet you're speaking to the fact that it was not easy to continue to be flexible in the face of the kind of demands, right? Even though it's something that you've always had to do too for such a range of students. And I think you're also speaking to something, and maybe we will return to hear from France, that we've been hearing that the community colleges have experienced a decline, like you've just spoken to, while the four-year universities, many of them have a huge increase in applications. So there's something going on in the shift of where the demand for education is, and whether it's the technology or the economic opportunities. And maybe we'll come back and comment some more on what's driving those changes. Before we go to our final speaker, I want to remind our audience to use the Q&A. There's a couple of questions that are coming in. So please go ahead and put them in, and we'll be pulling them together as we move into a Q&A for the second half after the final speaker. So thank you again, Eric. Our final speaker is David Biron. David is a French National Center for Scientific researcher of the Institute of Ecology and Environment. He has long established expertise in the field of host, parasite, pollutant interactions in ecosystems. David will round out our remarks, speaking more to the impacts of COVID on the research enterprise itself, including some novel approaches, including community science and the use of technologies to continue research when it's not possible for researchers to be out in the field. So David, please.
Yes, thank you, David, and thank you also for the committee for the invitation today. So as you know, since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, several research programs and projects carried out on natural environment have been disturbed or stopped. This pandemic calls into question our way of working and invite us to rethink and innovate for the acquisition of data in societal ecosystem. So one option is the setup and development of tools and methods for remote observation, for instance, by using automatic sensor, biology, camera drones, satellite remote sensing. Okay, an innovative research project involving many French research institutes, university and territorial partners will start in 2022. The acronym of this project is Terraforma. So one aim of this project is to design and test a smart observatory of socio-ecological system in the Anthropocene. So another point that I want to discuss with you is the citizen science. So for us in France, it was an efficient tool which has enabled several scientific projects to be carried out despite our confinement during the pandemic. For example, as part of an European project involving 10 countries, citizen science has enabled us to continue to monitor the health status of beehives and to determine the pesticide present in hive of beekeepers, because beekeeping in Europe was defined as a priority sector of activity, allowing beekeepers to go to their apiaries and to do sampling for the scientific project. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and it really speaks to the changes that are happening. Who's doing science? But we're hearing quite a bit about a range of impacts of changing roles. So thank you all for introductory remarks. We've heard some very clear shared impacts around issues of mental health, of course, around flexibility and being nimble. The beginning of the changes to actually the sustainability the engagement or the sustainability investments on the campuses, you know, even in terms of building buildings and what space will look like. And we now have an opportunity. We have a nice amount of time to continue with the Q&A. And again, to the audience, please go ahead and enter questions into the Q&A on the web. What I want to start with is a question for all the speakers about the net effect. I guess what I mean is the effect after we emerge from the pandemic of COVID-19. And I think we've heard a little bit about this, but let's circle back. And once we do get back into our offices, into our labs, into classrooms, and students return, I'm curious to hear what part of what we've done during the pandemic do you think will stick? Like, what were the things that now we've learned to do that we've learned really are valuable and will keep and continue to have as part of our system? And what parts might we just couldn't be happier to put in the rearview mirror and put behind us and not have to deal with again? Unfortunately, hopefully, not hopefully, unfortunately, possibly until another pandemic comes along. This may not be the last one of this century. And I would open it up to any of the panelists. Not everyone has to speak, but everyone could. And perhaps the easiest way just to deal with jumping in is, let me just suggest going right back to the order we started in, but if you want to pass, that's fine. And I think that would be Patrick first. So what do you think you'll keep as SPO from the pandemic going into the future? And
well, the first thing is exactly what I think Eric has underlined, is to develop more flexibility, generally speaking, meaning developing a diversification of a format we can offer from short-term to more long-term, combining some MOOC, some online with some physical presence, rethinking what we want to do with big class, what we want to do with small groups. So the all capacity to diversify what we offer, but also we combine those different elements and to think about the puzzle or what a curriculum should be doing in a much more precise and incisive way connected to the needs of the students. I think that's one which is very, very, very important. The second was also to really try to use a number of technological tools and devices with their limits, and we're still experimenting on a number of co-construction. And in a way, by a little bit nuanced from what Marty is saying, what we see in our students is some of them, and on some of what we do, some of the activities we have, some of the teaching we have, to have much more co-construction in some ways. But on the other end, on some other ones, remain quite strict on what we impose on something. And a lot of our work is to know what should be more collectively elaborated and what should become even more stricter in terms of what we want from the students. And that's for us, I think, a very, very strong element. A third thing which is quite clear is that we want more internationalization. We have been at Sciences Po moving forward very strongly this way, but without the trouble to some extent, or with different ways to do this internationalization, including we are pushing towards more classes with different universities and more collaborative between different institutions. And I think that will be very strong. And the last thing I want to emphasize, which is a more social change, which we see in different parts of the world, in France and the US, is that we see that a number of people, both students and staff, will do more work at home. What we see is that not so much people living the city and in the countryside. That's an illusion. We see more people living away a little bit in the sort of the big metropolitan area. But what we see more systematically is people who want to have one foot somewhere and one foot somewhere else, and spend some time, somewhere in France, sometimes in Europe, and some time in Paris. So sort of I don't know if it makes sense in English, be residentiality, where they make sense, be living in two places at the same time, and being a way to be flexible. And then we have to adapt to that. We can see that more and more people are coming in, coming out, and so we have to adapt to that in a more systematic way. And I think it's a more profound social change, like people coming to work only 2 or 3 days a week instead of 5. That's these two things together. This is something we have to adapt both for our own organization with our staff and professors that used to do that a bit anyway, but more systematically with students themselves.
So and we actually see the real estate market in the United States being transformed as people rethink where they want to live. But unfortunately, what you just spoke to is not a positive for sustainability. We may not be commuting daily, but all of a sudden people wanting to jump around and be.
I agree. It's a big contradiction for our students in particular.
That's right. That could be more travel, even when we thought this could be less travel. So I think that's maybe the jury's out. Marty, what will you all hang on to and see as a positive that came out of this?
Oh, it's still a dark glass. I can't see clearly through it yet. But what I can tell you is that I don't have to get on an airplane to have a meeting with you folks. We have had some of our largest participation in our national meetings and international meetings that we've ever had since we've moved to an online platform. The fact that, there's nothing replaces strolling down the Place de la Concordia. I mean, yes, there's value of being there, but I can attend a national or international meeting remotely, and it doesn't take a week. It takes half of 3 days. That's powerful, and that's not going to change.
Yeah, absolutely. Joel, any positives not positives, but things to keep in the future? And you're on mute, it looks like.
Well, I perfectly agree with what have been said by Patrick and Marty. So, what to say more? Yeah, it's a big change, but we don't know exactly what is the real balance between the face-to-face and the remote. So we have to practice it. We have to have a sort of, I don't know if it's the right word, but sort of hygiene of the digitalization, you know, because we are all drive by Zoom, by all these meetings, and we don't know how to manage it very well all day long. So we have to cope with that, and it's a balance we have to find. But I can say more what have been said. So.
Eric, any?
Sure, just real quickly, I'd like to offer that what we're definitely going to keep is how our students are interacting with professors. The traditional model was we'd have office hours, or we'd have a professor would have on Monday and Wednesday from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. come to my office. And oftentimes that was a very quiet time for that professor. What we're finding now is the virtual office hours and the way students engage with their professors has changed dramatically and increased significantly. So that's something that our instructors have really embraced, is that they're connecting with more students in different ways thanks to technology. So that's wonderful. What I hope we're not going to keep, though, is we've had a number of new employees across our system, new faculty, new staff that have started during the pandemic, but have yet to step foot on a campus. And we're seeing a great challenge in connecting them to the culture, the fiber, the fabric of the institution, because they've literally never been on campus as of yet. So for those individuals who just started working in our system, new faculty, new employees, what a challenge it's been to connect them in a meaningful way. Virtually, there's a connection, but it's not the same as sharing lunch in a common space, or walking through the quad, if you will, and just having that intellectual conversation. So I'm very concerned about new employees who started during the pandemic and how we're connecting with them, not even to mention new students who started during the pandemic and who may not have been on campus to get that cultural connection that's missing.
Yeah. And David, any?
Yes, concerning me, my case, well, one negative point, but is I think after is coming a positive point. Donc, I think for a lot of PhD and master students, it was very difficult for them this period that we live, and sometimes I think that they have the sensation to be isolated, and how to change that to positive thing. I think for all the people, for all the person, for example, I have many PhD students, this involved to me to be more in contact with them than I do before. So, for example, by Zoom, I contact frequently them to be sure that it's okay for them, that they are progressing. And I think for me, it's a positive point because in the future, I will use more frequently on this tool to be connect with all the person. Also, the other point that is for the Institute of Research. Donc, for example, as you know, frequently we have a national meeting frequently. And I think really is posed also the query of if necessary to take train or airplane only for a meeting of one day.
Yeah.
So this is also a positive point, perhaps eventually for the planet, or eventually for the emission of CO2, to think more about how we use the time of travel for different meetings, as administrative meeting, and it's also true when we are on the campus. I think it's possible also to manage. Eventually, it's not necessary that the students are all time present also on the campus. I'm sure that this will change a lot of things in working in university and the research institute.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think among colleagues, like this conversation, this works very well. One-on-one meetings, it works very well. Delivering large lectures, like Marty said, but there's something in the middle, 10, 20 people, where maybe it's the least effective as a mechanism of staying in touch, right? There's that middle ground. I do want to turn this around. I mean, it's nice to reflect on positives, but that may be a little optimistic given what we've faced. Several of you, we spoke to the digital divide, we spoke to the community, the first generation students being more impacted. And then in the United States, we had this just exceptional occurrence where the Black Lives Matter movement erupted in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. When we look back on 2020, there will be these two events. And in some ways they were independent, but in some ways they were completely overlapping and sort of running into each other. So I think I don't want to ask everyone to go in turn again. I think those who would like to speak, let's just be a little more flexible here. What is the net outcome here about whether we're seeing an increasing divide, increasing gaps between marginalized populations and more privileged? What is that net impact of what we saw during the pandemic, and how do we not have that become worse as we go forward? Marty, go ahead.
I've become very aware of, as a member of the Cherokee Nation, and as working with on the board of the Global Council for Science and the Environment, and working with our sort of cultural and social equity commitment. We've become very aware, self-aware of our colonial attitudes. Colonialism simply is the expression of authority of a particular cultural set of values over another. The academy is very colonial. We have a history of imposing cultural authority over others, and with Native Americans and with especially with underrepresented minorities, cultures from those the other cultures have been seen as a deficiency to be corrected, and they still are. And so it goes back to this sense of we're going to have to be much more self-aware, much more sensitive to things that we used to disregard as perhaps as even as weakness. Now, that is a fundamental colonial attitude, that we disregard other people's attitudes as weakness. And that is where I've been in the academy my entire adult life, and I have to tell you, this has been a difficult journey to come to this conclusion.
Patrick, can I just ask, whether from the French side, what parallels and similarities or differences and how this is playing out?
Well, I guess as for all those issues of gaps and social inequality, it depends on the scale. If we think at the global scale, we know the result. The gap is increasing. Think about the vaccines, or think about the accumulation of wealth by the top 1%. So at the global scale, just no doubt. At the French scale, we also see increasing gaps, particularly although we were quite strict to prevent too much closure of the schools. They were closed at some point, and all the evidence point to devastating effect for children of disadvantaged background. Also because during the lockdown, they are in small flats and they cannot, they don't have the internet access, and they cannot concentrate and have good resources. So we know that at the French scale, I will also see quite obvious increase. We hope that at the scale of Sciences Po, we would see something different. Sciences Po has been, although an elitist institution, has done a very voluntarist policy to increase the number of disadvantaged students. We have twice as many as a normal university in Paris with disadvantaged background, and we have a very progressive system of social grants. And so we knew from day one, when the pandemic started, that those students will be the weak ones. So from day one, we try to develop special devices and special schemes to support them. So the access to internet, for instance, we opened some rooms at Sciences Po specifically for those students. We had this specific system of mentoring. So we do hope, we're not entirely sure, but we do hope that at the scale of Sciences Po, we limited this gap as much as we could. And it seems like, with some exceptions, we've done quite well to achieve that, because from day one, we put a lot of resources to do that. But of course, at the scale of Paris, France, or the world, the effect will be increased social polarization.
Yeah. So let's use the time we have to transition and talk some about sustainability, which will segue into the rest of the symposium over the next couple of days. And Joël, maybe I'll turn to you first. So you look at a network of a lot of campuses, a lot of institutions, and where are the opportunities, what are the challenges emerging and the opportunities emerging from COVID to accelerate the work towards sustainability, both within the institutions, but also the role of universities in serving the greater society?
What we see this crisis as an opportunity to rethink mobility at all levels, local, national, and international level. Another face-to-face versus remote balance is established, which limits the GHG emissions due to travel, but greatly increases those due to the use of digital tools. Some of our institutions are starting to set up carbon offsets for staff, and others annual carbon quotas for students who have to manage their travel against these quotas. And at the European level, the Erasmus exchange program works on the establishment of a rail pass to travel all over Europe as an alternative to the plane. What we see too is the opportunity to capitalize on the forced skills acquisition of teachers, during this period, to better address issues of socio-ecological transitions that need a participatory and horizontal educational formats. I would say globally that the attractiveness and the specificity of higher education institution is changing. The student experience will no longer dissociate the pedagogical act from the quality of life on campus. We are used to speak of an integral pedagogical experience. This pedagogy must respond to the quest of meaning and the strong ecological awareness of a large proportion of our students, but also to must respond to the needs of the companies too. We think that this pedagogy is highly localized. It works mainly in interaction with research and innovation and on demonstrative campuses and with the local communities and stakeholders. So that's a big change. We have big opportunities.
Yeah, the idea of a carbon quota, that's one I had not yet heard to give students a sort of a limit to work within in terms of their own travel, their own movement, and that would be quite interesting. Eric, if I can ask you, in the community colleges, Marty spoke to already rethinking space, but then Eric, you spoke about students in parking lots in their cars trying to get Wi-Fi. So of course being remote may not be entirely an option if you need Wi-Fi. So how are you all rethinking your future of construction of buildings, of allocation of space for different functions, and is there a sustainability benefit for that process?
Yeah, I think the one thing we are rethinking is how we're designing our classrooms. We know we have many instructors who want to teach in that dual modality, being able to teach virtually or also in person, but our classrooms really were not designed to sustain that, quite honestly. So we're looking at the thought of creating more like learning studios where we have video capabilities that are enhanced, that we could have students in person in that space as well as students learning remotely at the same time. Now that's very challenging from an instructor's perspective, but that's something we're looking at. We're also looking at our labs historically have not been as modern as we'd like them to be in our community colleges. So what can we do from a research perspective to create more of a technology enhanced lab environment that we can have students collaborating across the nation or across the world, quite honestly, in that space. And I saw a question in the chat too about the community's use of space. We are definitely exploring how can we better leverage our space to meet the needs of our community. We did so already with a lot of our athletic facilities. We rented those out, things of that nature, but can we expand that more so that we're renting out our labs, that we're renting out our renting may not be the right word, but partnering with our communities that can then access our facilities. We are a community college, and consequently, community is the foundation of who we should be serving. And I think the pandemic's reminded us that we need to continue to do better outreach to the community, and that might be through space, or that might be even leveraging the expertise we have and how that can influence a community through whether it's guest speakers, whether again it's through participation on a different community organization. But really the main thing I'm seeing right now in the short term is the rethinking of our classroom space. How do we enhance that so it can be dual modality, if you will, as opposed to the single modality in which it was created?
Right. So now we have to do both. We've set an even harder task for ourselves. And Patrick, you spoke to doing quite a bit in hybrid mode, which I think we're still at Berkeley, we're still working on, because we went all remote. So we did not try to do the hybrid during the pandemic. Eric, you spoke about labs, and as a science faculty member, this is one activity. A discussion section is hard on Zoom. A lab is impossible in a real lab, obviously hands-on work with any kind of biological material. But I want to ask David a question. So you talked about community science. I'm just going to put you on the spot here to think about, how much do you think we could give students, labs at home, like do it in your backyard? And we've seen a little bit of it during the pandemic. We saw some science faculty trying to do that. Do you think the community science could extend to sort of in-home science education where you're not having to be in a laboratory space?
Yes, this is true. For why when I spoke about the eventually of the observatory system, we have, for example, sensor biologging. For sure, it's for our scientific project, but for doing science with the student, here in France, the solution that we had during the pandemic situation, we authorize 50% of the student to come off the campus during the pandemic. We have for example, the people here, here we call this a distance, in US it's a bachelor. They can come to do their laboratory part on their cursus on the campus. So for the practical thing, they come on the campus. So during the pandemic, so we will be able to find this solution. Yeah. But we have it's during the bad period, last year, yes, nobody, but in the fall and December, we have at least 25% of the student can come off until 50. And for PhD and master student, in the lab is always we maintain in fall and until here 50% of the scientists, PhD and master can come in the lab. So we give priority to them to do their master and PhD. So this is the solution that we take.
Yeah, these are all work in progress, especially, more hands-on parts of our education. So we're wrapping up now, and I want to put a sort of a pin on one thing that we did not circle back to that people spoke to, which was the mental health challenges and the student support services. And I'm sure that all of you are thinking about ways to also come out of the pandemic, realizing that that our students will continue to need us, or maybe need more from us. And I know Berkeley is rethinking our mental health support systems to just sort of bring it out of less of a crisis mode and more of a network of support at all levels, just recognizing that students can need a whole range of services, not waiting until it's a crisis before we intervene and provide that support. And I think there's been a lot of lessons learned in that regard as well. And I think we hear common themes, of course, of events like this, the way the outreach, the way we reach students across space. On our campus, we're using the phrase elasticity of space, just that ability to work through technology. But then I think the deepest concern that I hear coming out of this is if this moment with this technology that should bring us together turns out to be a moment where inequality increased, where the gap increased between the most disadvantaged and more privileged, that's the tragedy. That will be the tragedy of COVID if this moment of going into what should be a shared technology, in fact, turns out to have increased the challenges of bridging those divides. And I think that's a challenge all of our universities will face going forward. So we're going to wrap it up there, and I will turn it back to our hosts,